Hi, I'm going to do another video uh, off the cuff, like the last few, because I just enjoy doing them that way. Um, so anyway, my name's Henry Covert. I'm here, and I'm probably going to be doing a lot of these. They're fun, they're therapeutic, I guess. Um, the next one I will cover some more DVD, Blu-rays, some recent purchases of the few I've been able to muster, mostly deals I got on eBay, some in trade with DVDs I'm trading in. I can't really, collect, uh, can't officially full time collect anything anymore, but I'm always going to be a collector. So even I'm liquidating like huge amounts of my collections, most of my DVDs, and a lot of my comic books, some of my books, a lot of magazines, and eventually some toys. I've already sold a few toys, but they were ones that I already had sitting around unboxed, so that was cool. Um, I don't want to get into the whole reseller thing. At my day job, we have some cats who will come in every time a new Funko Pop is released, and they want to buy every one, and then they want to turn around on eBay and sell it for a huge markup. So I'm not into that, but I did buy a couple of things and marked them up slightly. So at least I broke even, made a couple of dollars profit after postage. Anyway, so that's my eBay store. Business is kind of all over the map. Um, it's been really strong at times, and of late it's been kind of steady but slow and not huge orders all at once, small orders, and then once in a while I'll get a large order or one large item, expensive item sold. So, not going to be quitting the day job. Anyway, so this time I'm going to try not to take too long, but this time I wanted to talk about something I probably won't get back to for a while, um, but it doesn't have to do with any of my collecting. It has to do with my creating. So, no, I'm not going to sing a song for you or anything. But don't have any visual aids right off hand. I might have some. I don't know. Anyway, it's basically about Flickr Street. So Flickr Street, what the hell is it? So people ask me this online, like in PMs. I haven't written like a giant expository thing, that may end up being like a TLDR kind of situation anyway. I thought talking about it, if I can hold your attention long enough, I could give you some information, maybe make you more interested in it, who knows. Um, but essentially, Flickr Street is a story that I've been working on and off for over 30 years. No, I'm not all that old. I was very young when I started it, and eventually, it kind of evolved into what I have now, which is kind of a comic book story, though I don't have a lot of stuff visually laid out in comic book form. Illustrations, character illustrations, designs, um, sometimes more abstract drawings because that actually ties in with some of the extra dimensional elements that are in it, and a lot of prose and fake found documents and kind of metafictional things. I'd like to branch into media, maybe do some videos on here that uh, are set in or report on that universe. Not sure how I would go about it exactly, but it's an idea I've been thinking about. So, like the whole hoax thing of, this is really happening. Uh, I was bitten by that bug when I was about 14, and I picked up Doc Savage, His Apocalyptic Life by Philip was a Farmer on my birthday. And wow, I mean, it basically not only did it tie together all these action adventure heroes and villains and other literary figures into a giant family tree. Um, it said they were all real and they were all based on real people and et cetera, et cetera. But that's called the Walt Newton family. Win Scott Eckert, who is the custodian of the Walt Newton family in Philip Jose Farmer's passing, a friend of mine. He's helped me a lot over the years, and he's kind of full time writing in that world now, both for Marion things and also licensed from Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated. He has a Tarzan novel out that just came out. So congratulations, Win. Um, so anyway, he has a lot of expository information on his website, like what is the Walden family, etc. I myself used to do a column for a magazine called Amazing, I think it was called Astonishing Adventures magazine, called The World of Walt Newton, where I kind of tried to introduce readers to it. And then I did, Win and I both did some work along my ex-wife on her defunct website. So I was kind of a apostle of Walt Newton for quite a while, and an avid writer and theorist of pastiche fiction and metafiction. Um, but to be honest, I'd been working on Flickr Street for years before I met Win, or I mean, I had no idea there was a community of Philip Jose Farmer fanatics like me, or much less Walt Newton family adherents. I found that in 2004 when I first went on the internet on Yahoo, and changed my life. I've made some lifelong friends and great alliances, had some fun times, and been able to do a lot of things, including meet Philip Jose Farmer in person before he passed away. And he's my favorite fiction writer, by the way, and a big influence on me, and on Flickr Street. So I decided to move in a slightly different direction because I don't know, maybe I should start way back at the beginning in the Pleistocene era. Uh, when I was a kid, deep breath. Um, yes, when I was a mere munchkin, I had a friend named Thomas Davis, Thomas Shackelford Davis. Um, Thomas is no longer with us. He passed away very prematurely of cancer at age 36, maybe 36, in 2004, I believe. I was not in contact with him at the time of his passing. I had lost contact with him around 1989, 1990. But from my young childhood, third grade, when he came to my class, and he just moved here from living in Mexico and Mexico City and New Mexico, and just, it was all foreign to me. And of course, he had a ton of luchador and mass wrestler paraphernalia that his dad bought him, which I thought was cool because they looked like superheroes. I had no idea many years later I'd be knowledgeable about and a fan of such things myself directly. Um, even have a couple of characters who fit into that rubric. So, Flickr Street characters. But anyway, he was just like this. I don't know. He was like this extremely young, outspoken, brainy, funny guy who um, he was like Jack Kirby. I mean, I'm not putting him to that level of genius, but he was so influenced by Kirby and Kirby's explosion of ideas. And I was very precocious when it came to comics and reading and literature. Thomas was even more so, and he was almost a year older than me, and he really was my only friend, really, for several years. Definitely my very best friend. I was a very withdrawn, lonely, kind of to myself kid. I didn't hang out. I didn't go out. I didn't date. I didn't do sports. I didn't do drugs. Um, and that continued from elementary school all the way through pretty much to high school. By high school, I did have some other friends, but we'll get into that. But through elementary school and junior high school, Thomas was my best friend. I kind of idolized him, and he moved away, unfortunately, in right after the fifth grade. Sorry, my alarm clock thing is going off. He moved in. Moved in. He didn't move in with me. He moved away from Charlotte, North Carolina, in the fifth grade, and essentially, I'm going to turn this off, or it will drive me insane. Hold on. Right. My watch states that it's a magical number 333. Three was my ex-fiance's life path number and her magic number, and she would always encounter threes, 33s, and 333s constantly, and she would shout out 3:33 a.m. and p.m. every day because she would notice them right then. So anyway, enough of that. So Thomas. So Thomas, yeah, I mean, he was like Jack Kirby. I mean, he was really into Jack Kirby's fourth world concept, and of course the Marvel stuff with Stan Lee. I was more of a Stan Lee worshiper, and he was more of a Jack Kirby worshiper. And we were both fans of both. But we both, by the time we're in the fourth grade, we knew the names of all the comic book writers and artists. We'd read a ton of things. We were just starting to try to get back issues. He had more money than I did due to his father's job with Associated Press to purchase back issues. I didn't have a whole lot of luck in that area. Heroes Cons, hosted by Shelton Drum. He still hosts them to this day, not this year due to COVID. Shelton Drum, I've known him since I was like 8 years old, I believe. But he had a thing called a mini con in this place called Eastland Mall. um, and Thomas and I would go to those. I think we went to one together and then a few separately. And I would pick up a few back issues with my allowance, but he was all over it. He was getting a bunch, and he was actually buying DCs. He didn't like DC. He was a Marvel partisan like me, but like me, he also would buy a DC when a character or art caught his eye, and he was more knowledgeable about it than I was. Of course, by the time we're getting to this period, Superman the movie's out, and there's a kind of break in consciousness, and of course there was the Batman show, but that was before that started before he or I were born. Um, so essentially, he moved away, and I was sad, but he mentored me through my junior high years, which were very, very hard years for me, and I was bullied a lot. A lot of horrible things happened to me at home and at school. And but Thomas would send me these elaborate packages and envelopes, and he would draw all over the envelopes. Basically, anything he could get away with that would go through the mail and not be rejected. Drawings and jokes and symbols and weird things. But his imagination was exploding. And what he had done in the fourth grade was to create like this superhero team. He called them the Sensational Seven. Now, since then, many years later, and only in recent years, have a couple of comic properties used either officially or pejoratively the Sensational Seven as the name of a group. It has not been trademarked as the title of a comic. And then, of course, you have things like the Seven. That's easy to come to. And, of course, that's in The Boys, the comic book, and now popularized by the incredible television series, The Boys. And the Seven are the seven prime superheroes on that planet. And as you can probably, if you're familiar at all with the concept, or Garth Ennis, the writer, creator, yeah, the seven are complete sociopathic assholes, except for one of them. So, um, so yeah, the Sensational Seven. So these were kind of archetypal characters. They were simplistic, they were childlike, but they were still catchy, and they still had some resonance as the years went by. But I wanted to update them, and I wanted to have my own team. So Thomas created a team for me. Uh, it was the something six. It was really cheesy. He just banged it out in like 5 minutes. There were six of them, and they were kind of weak characters compared to the Sensational Seven. But he's like, you go write this, draw this, design these guys. He gave me the names of the characters, name of the team, the very basic what each guy did. I was one woman, five guys, and yeah, of course, no minorities. Same with the Sensational Seven, though. Um, Later, he did work an American Indian character into the Sensational Seven for a while, but he killed him off. So we worked together on this, and as time went on, I kind of had to really overhaul the stuff he'd left me. I created a character called Nemesis, who was basically started out as like the Hulk. And he was a Jewish scientist who went through some kind of process and transformed into this bizarre creature called Nemesis. And I still like that concept. And to be honest, that character, the scientist, Dr. Rubenstein, is still a minor, albeit deceased character in Flicker Street. And obviously, what I'm getting at is that Flicker Street evolved directly from these, you know, imaginary comics that Thomas and I would make up and talk on the phone about and act out individually and together on the phone. Like my friend Tim McLean says, I have a rich interior life. And I did. Thomas was more of a socialite, and he eventually had his eyes set on becoming a lawyer. However, he never tried to disguise his geekishness to the people in Missouri that he went to high school and college with and law school. And I got to respect him for that, though we lost touch when he was about to enter law school. By that time, I was attempting to. I'd made up a bunch of characters, and I'd made up a whole lot of background on his characters, and I'd altered a lot of things, the names, the landscape. He had a blueprint, and with his permission, I retained some names and some things I just completely changed and dropped out anyway. So by the time I got to high school, I was like, I'm going to make my own comic books. And I had a couple of friends, and we drew them together. Most of them I was trying to find, work for hire artists like Marvel had, but of course, how can I pay them? We had like a club, and we raised due money. My closest collaborator in that period, I'm going to call him JJ, and JJ and I, we've had a parting of the ways for some 30 years. His decision, not mine. And but he was a creative dynamo as a kid too. He wasn't as creative as I became or as Thomas was, but he had that kind of mind for a while, a world building kind of mind. And we went crazy with the world building. But it was still kind of constrained by the superhero paradigm and episodic paradigm. It was a lot of soap opera elements, which I was hugely into soap operas. And that was a huge influence on my storytelling, that and the Marvel comics of the 70s and 80s. They were my biggest. So my stuff was dramatic and larger than life, but not cosmic. In the 90s, Marvel went cosmic and mutants, and everyone was just God. I don't like that. So today I have a science fiction grounding and more abstract grounding, surrealist flavor to Flicker Street. But back then it was pretty conventional stuff with some nice ideas and a few good names. And so anyway, all of that didn't work out. The last few people we tried to hire, again, for free, JJ and I fell out for a bit, and I tried to work with a guy named Christopher Pack. Christopher Pack basically wanted to write really adult comics for us. He was really into Jim Starlin, and he was really into Death Rock, which we now call goth, and he was into a lot of dark stuff, Nietzsche, and he had a whole element. He was ahead of the rest of us on that curve. He had a harder life than the rest of us growing up. I met him when he and I were 13. So by the time we're talking toward the end of high school, we had worked some of his ideas in, but I didn't like many of his names of his characters. I thought a lot of things were limited, but the concepts, the tone the thematics, the adult aspect I liked. And so I was going in this direction anyway, but Chris was happy to see that I kind of, with his inspiration a bit, began writing those kind of stories myself. So I began incorporating, you know, murder, rape, incest, uh, racism, all these topics into the stories. Not condoning any of those things I just mentioned, by the way. They were just topics. It was a topical thing. And I wanted to go steps beyond what Stan Lee had done with that kind of stuff, or even people like Steve Gerber were trying to do with it and largely succeeding, but still hamstrung by corporate comic book companies. That's something I don't want to ever be a part of. I despise that culture, and it was too confining. And as I got older, even soap operas became more confining. They used to be wide open, anything could happen. But they began becoming more and more formulaic. Even the innovations in soap operas, like introduction of science fiction and horror elements, um, which were radical at the time, even they started becoming formulaic by the 1990s, with a very few exceptions. In the 80s, that stuff was cutting edge, though, and it influenced my stories for sure, especially Douglas Marland, who wrote a lot of soap operas in the late 70s and early 80s. And he was a huge influence on me, much like Philip was a farmer, one of those key writers. He was into world building and continuity and a darker, more gothic side, as well as a science fiction kind of high tech super spy side. And it's no coincidence that he created my two favorite soap opera characters of all time, Quentin McCord, who was a mysterious archaeologist in this kind of gothic mansion, very introspective, not like the other characters on his show, more like he wandered out of dark shadows. And Luke Spencer, played by Anthony Geary for many years, he began as a thug and then a rapist, and then ultimately he saved the planet Earth, and he did that many times. And then he wavered back and forth between being a hero, a killer. He had his own code, and his charisma as an actor, it sold it. This was before you had people like Todd Manning, even, which elevated that into a sensational thing with younger people and women. But Luke was there first. And so, anyway, those iconic things influenced me. Another iconic writer that influenced me was James A. Missioner. The Centennial television show I saw as a very young child, and I loved it. And then again, it was like a saga. It was like the Lord of the Rings out west. And I wasn't really interested in westerns that much at all as a genre or historical exploration. My dad was, and my mom liked Missioner. She liked the Book of Hawaii quite a bit, and some of his other works. So the three of us bonded on Centennial. And I've read Centennial back to back, front cover to back cover, shortly after the series ended. I also read the entirety of Hawaii, the book, not the state. And so Centennial, the fictional city Centennial, even though there is a real Centennial, Colorado, this is a fictional one. Missioner traced that one part of land from the beginning of the earth, the cooling of the molten lava, all the way through the first explorers, the American Indians, and then the Europeans, etc., all the way up to 1973, when you had concerns about ecology and the land disappearing, way of life changing, and wonderfully embodied by David Jansen in the character Paul Garrett in the final episode of Centennial, the show, and also the final chapter of the novel. So he was very into genealogy. That was really the big thing. Genealogy and discussing how these people inherited these traits, et cetera, and racial mixing, mainly Native American and Caucasian, but also like in Hawaii with the Polynesians, the Native Hawaiians, the Japanese and Chinese characters. There weren't too many black characters, though, interbreeding into these families, unfortunately. And I wasn't quite I loved black characters. I loved them. The ones that were out there in the comics and in the soap operas. The very few there were, and I wanted there to be more. But I wasn't at that level of consciousness yet to where I could create one and do it justice. That I could shape things up. But that was yet another thing. I thought, why not? And later, I came to the same conclusion with gay characters and transgender characters and anti-heroes and I don't know, it's the other. And now that's kind of those are kind of the protagonists of Flicker Street. Uh, it's not these rich, good-looking vigilantes who everyone loves and or hates. There's not a Batman in my universe. If characters ever approach that kind of character, they're going to be represented, I guess, like Garth Ennis or Alan Moore might do, which is extremely cynical because they're going to uphold American values that I personally don't believe are values. And they personally, yeah, we'll get into that. There's a bit of that in the story. There's quite a bit of political allegory and commentary in my story, but most of it's pretty subversive. Um, let's just say where my story is going right now and has been going for the last, say, 3 years, the current arc called Ellinger. America is actually starting to go there in reality, and I wonder if it will move quicker toward the massive sea change in our way of life than the one I had planned in Flicker Street. It's frightening and interesting at the same time. So let me flash back again before I wrap this up, because I don't want to really go over a half hour. I yes, after high school, uh, another artist that we worked with, last artist we really worked with, that was Douglas Williams. Doug Williams and I are still good friends today. We lost touch for quite a while, but Facebook, and he's a great musician. He has a band, and he remembers the characters and he remembers all that. I don't know that he draws much, but he is a great artist and a great friend. And he didn't really add anything to the mythos per se. Most people didn't. Most of it was just Thomas's skeleton and then me filling it, fleshing it out and filling it. And then, JJ threw in some organs here and there. And, but eventually a lot of his stuff I threw out, retooled, renamed, completely replaced, rethought, revised. So it is fair to say that all of the characters in Flicker Street are mine. Though there are some characters and concepts that are based on Thomas's templates. But since he gave me permission to do all this and now he's deceased, if I ever became rich off this, there's no way I could pay him back. I don't know, maybe I could send his family some money or something. But I don't foresee this happening. But if it did, I'd be glad to do that. He didn't have any children. No one survived him, I don't believe, sadly. But yeah, so by 1990, I wasn't into this as a collaborative thing. I always felt like I had to have someone to collaborate with, and I later had the same attitude with music when I teamed up with people like Matt Summer and Don Miller. They're obscure Charlotte musicians, and Jason V. Brock, who's a more well-known writer now, but who was a guitar player and leader of Chiaroscuro, and I joined his band on and off. And the collaboration thing was great. I wasn't good enough in music to do it all by myself, at least not then. And I don't know, I may be now. I'm still not quite sure. But in writing, yeah. I mean, and by the time the 90s waned, I had done a massive amount of world building. I'd done more living in my life. I absorbed more art, and I had done a lot more thinking about the world. And I don't know. I was more grounded in reality, pragmatism of hardships of life. But also, my imagination was blown open, and I didn't feel encumbered by any particular paradigm or rules of how to live, how to be, and that extended into my writing. In fiction, I tend to check morality at the door. I'm not judging my characters. If I am, it's going to become apparent. I'm not going to say I never do. Generally not. I can be sympathetic, have a sympathetic character that I ideologically would not get along with in real life. Um, but I do use my stories to work a lot of that out. I told my good friend Bill White once, not long ago, that Flicker Stew was basically about the two R's, romance and redemption. And he said, "What else is there in stories?" And yeah, maybe so. Those are my two big ones. And I didn't just have love interests like comic book heroes did. Again, I'd broken out of the superhero comic book thing. And it's so ironic that full circle now superheroes are mainstream popular. It's weird because they were not when we were growing up, especially when Thomas and I were here in the South. Um, no, it was not cool to read comic books, and at least past maybe 7, 8 years old. And it was not, yeah, it was not considered legitimate literature or storytelling. This was before Watchmen and Dark Knight. But even after Watchmen and Dark Knight, they really weren't cool, around here. Shelton did his part with his conventions, and of course, other books like Sandman, Neil Gaiman's work, exploded things a good bit. And of course, the indies like Love and Rockets. Basically, they matured the form. Art Spiegelman, etc. And that was to the public. But there were always visionaries anyway, and Kirby was always one of them, especially when he wrote his own scripts and dialogue. Plot wise, he always wrote his own stories. I don't care what anyone says. Whether Stanley scripted them or not and edited, that's fine. But Kirby created those characters, and because thematically they are part of him. He was an auteur, and that's why he continued to want to write certain characters for Marvel when he came back, that because he had single-handedly created them. Captain America, with a little help from Joe Simon. Black Panther, with a little help from Stan Lee, but they were his. And then, of course, he created his own mythology there, just as he had with DC with the Fourth World. And he kept myth making until he died. So he's another key iconic person on me. So I'm named like 4. So I'll probably throw another one out later. But the other one in comics would be Steve Gerber, and I'm not going to go into all that right at the moment. I do own a Steve Gerber group on Facebook called Steve Gerber RIP, because I inherited the group around the time Steve passed. You're welcome to join. We screen members, but hey, if you're cool, it's all right. Gerber was brilliant. I think he was the most brilliant writer in mainstream comic books. In that generation, the comics that were popular in the 1970s and 80s, when I was a child. Though to me, that stuff, I liked it. I didn't read kiddie comic books. I didn't watch kiddie cartoons. I didn't have to have things dumbed down for me. I didn't have to be protected from things. I was squeamish about gore and embarrassed about sex, but I still absorbed them as art, and I made peace with those things because that was within myself, the things I had to make peace with as I got older. Why did they disturb me? And there's still things in art that disturb me. And I'm kind of glad they disturb me, because if they didn't, I don't know, I may have lost a piece of my soul that I could never regain. And as far as my own work, it's only relatively recently, like in the last maybe 5, 6 years, since I've completely rededicated myself to Flicker Street full time, that I have worked a lot more violence and sex and into the romance and conflict and action, and more disturbing elements, more horror elements, certainly, and then some cosmic horror, quite a bit of cosmic horror, which I thought I would never be able to write, and I wasn't that interested in writing. So I'm not trying to jump on the bandwagon of the Lovecraftians either. I've created my own cosmology. Obviously, there are some parallels. with the great old ones here and there, but no, it's not Lovecraft. There are some coincidences and synchronicities that even I found interesting, such as my city of Hallmark. If you put it on a real world map, which I did, it would be in almost the same place as if you put Arkham in a real world map. They're both in Massachusetts. And, actually, when I first got into Lovecraft, um, in junior high, I believe, late junior high, early high school probably, I was going to have Arkham be a city, like a neighbor city, and have that Cthulhu mythos be part of the Flicker Street mythos, which wasn't called Flicker Street then. But this was still back when I was working with JJ and still in touch with Thomas, and they were more interested in those elements than I was. I was interested in the occult and the magical, but I didn't really care about writing Lovecraft's characters, which makes me different than probably hundreds of my friends on Facebook and people I've met over the last few years. I have no interest in writing Lovecraft's characters or his cosmology. I love it, but it's not mine. I don't care about it. I don't have a personal investment in it. And unlike a lot of people, I don't tend to make money off the name of a deceased artist that I constantly insult in order to make myself appear more enlightened. So that's enough of that subject. So anyway, next time, I guess I'll do a part 2 of this before we get back into the movies, and make sure you all are asleep. If it didn't happen this time, this next one should be an absolute cure for any insomnia that you're suffering from. So I'll pick back up the thread of the chronology of how we led to Flicker Street. I believe the last coherent bit was around 1990, and the early to mid 1990s when I began writing completely by myself and world building into the framework, the infrastructure of exactly what it is now. So that world has existed for about 25 years of the time span of this, and it was in 1995 that I named it Flicker Street, that I came up with what was that name and what it means as a place. And over the years, even though I was not a fanatic of David Lynch in 1995, though I was a fan, I had not seen many Twin Peaks, but I was in awe of it as a television show. It was not an influence on me. So some of my stuff ran parallel to that, and by the time I became obsessed with Twin Peaks in the 2000s, I started seeing those elements, the cosmic horror, the soap opera, and Flicker Street being a place, just like Twin Peaks is a place, Mulholland Drive is a place, Inland Empire is a place. You get the message. So I'm going to sign off, and I'll see you back here next time. We'll pick up in 1995, and I'll try to explain, in better, hopefully more concise way, the last 25 years and what Flicker Street is and where I'm hoping to go with it. Thank you.